So welcome back to quiltingwithlori.com. My name is Lori Dickman, and this is the block A of my fall 2021 mystery quilt class. And today I'm going to demonstrate how you construct the block A, the pieces that you're going to be pulling, as well as how you're going to be cutting out templates for this particular block. So for block A, you'll see that we need lights, darks, and mediums. And this is my stash that I've cut from yardage in the appropriate size squares. There are 50 lights, 50 darks in 2.5-inch squares. There are 20 4.5-inch lights and 20 5-inch mediums. That will make up the 5 blocks that are needed of block A, which is the 5440 or fight block in this quilt. Here is the scraps that I have pulled from my scrap stash. Again, we needed 50 of each the lights and the darks, 2.5-inch squares. We needed 20 of the light 4.5-inch squares and 20 of the medium 5-inch squares. So I've pulled everything that I need to make a scrappy block and to make the yardage blocks, or the blocks from yardage. You're going to be creating 4-patch units. The 5440 or fight block really just contains 5 of the 4-patch units per block, as well as 4 of a rather tall flying geese unit. And I'm going to show you what that looks like and how that is cut here in just a moment. So this is the block A of our mystery quilt, and here you'll see it done in yardage. And I've used darks, lights, and mediums to create this block. It's simply a 9-patch of different units. There are 5 of the 4-patch units, and there are 4 of these rather tall flying geese units. They're the star units, that they're the wings to the star for this particular block. And so this is how it's going to look if you're using yardage, and in this case I've used purples and salmon color. You might choose a Christmas theme, whatever fabric colors you choose. It'll be beautiful. Here it is in a very scrappy. So what I have done here is I've got the dark 2.5-inch and the light 2.5-inch 4 patches going through the center, and then we have these 4 flying geese units, or the star points, for each of the stars, and they're made with mediums and lights. This one is rather busy. I might choose to remove this particular fabric and go with a lighter one, which will help this medium fabric to pop more. So that's something that you'll want to take a look at as you're piecing together your blocks. Just if you find one that's just fighting or competing, you might want to remove it and find another one that allows the eye to flow freely across the block and be able to pick up the different points. But this is what it's going to look like. Here it is in yardage. Make sure that you pull your PDF down from that link is below. Make sure that you have that. You're going to need that for step 1. It gives you the step-by-step instructions on how we're going to make this. Also, make sure that you pull down the template PDF. That will also be attached, and we're going to be creating templates for these 3 pieces right here. The one thing that you're going to want to remember, and while I'm on this well, I have this block right here, I wanted to point this out. Make sure that you allow yourself the 1/4-inch seam allowance at each of the points here. You'll notice in most cases I have plenty of room left for the 1/4-inch seam allowance, but I'm going to have an issue here. I'm going to lose a point, and here I'm going to lose a point. So it's really important as you're piecing this to make sure that you allow that 1/4-inch seam allowance, so that when you put the blocks together, you're not cutting off all of your points. So these 2 blocks here I will probably readdress so that I can ensure I don't lose my points when I sew this together. And then you're going to want to trim up all these blocks to 12.5 inches when you're done. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and take a look at the templates that we're going to be cutting out. So the template pieces, like I had mentioned, are in this PDF. We're going to be creating the B, which is the center of the flying geese unit, and then we're going to be creating the C and the D I was lazy and only did the D. It is a reverse image, so C is a reverse image of the D. So I just cut out one of these, and I'm going to make sure when I cut out the pieces that I flip it over to ensure that I have both star points for my flying geese unit. When you're cutting out the B template, you're going to pull your lights, your 4.5-inch lights. You're going to place your template on there, and you'll cut it, and all of this is laid out perfectly in the PDF of instructions. But you'll trim it away. I like to use a fine ink pen, pencil, or marker and draw that on there, and then I cut with a ruler and a rotary cutter. I don't want to cut into my plastic template, which is why I always trace onto the fabric and then trim. You're going to end up with these extra little pieces after you have cut this away. And these are really not big enough for me to save in my scrap stash. However, you could use these to make crumb quilts or a pet pillow with those. But those would not be used in my scrap stash because they're just too small. Now we're going to get to the point where you're going to be cutting out your star legs. And you're going to definitely use a 5-inch medium. When you are using yardage, basically it's all going to be this one medium. And so I've laid the D template here to one side, and I've also flip it over here and trace on both sides. The reason that I did that was to ensure that I had exactly what I needed for each star leg. I wanted the reverse image. This does give us this leftover piece in the center here. It's a triangle that will be left over. And it's an extra triangle which you can use for scraps, and I will be offering a challenge for all of you to use that leftover large triangle here in a challenge project, and there'll be more details coming on that later, so stay tuned on that. But you'll want to trace and cut these out of all of your yardage. If you're using scraps for your quilt, what I wanted to do was make sure that both legs of my star matched on each of the flying geese units. So I made sure that I chose a 5-inch square, which allowed me to have room to be able to place that template on both sides. Trace it, cut it out, and of course we'll have that excess piece in the middle. And you'll see here in just a moment how those two pieces get sewn to that center section. But first, let's take a look at the 4-patch. So for each of the 4-patch units that we're going to need in Block A, you're going to be using two 2.5-inch darks and two 2.5-inch lights. And you'll put them together as a simple 4-patch, which I have done here. And and I like to do mine all in assembly line fashion on my machine, and so they'll often have this little link here as I've sewn it together. But you're going to want to make the center of your seam allowances flattened, which really does help for quilting purposes, and I'll give you a close-up here of that. See how that has been twisted and turned and flattened. And there's a simple way of doing that. I did make sure I loosened that thread, and then you just twist, open it up, and it's pretty much, whoops, I'm going the wrong direction here. And it's ready to be pressed. So this will press this direction, this will press that direction. So basically I just twisted to loosen those two threads. You might need to clip them if they're really tight, and then press them like that, and that will flatten that. It kind of makes a little pinwheel there, and that will flatten the center of the 4-patch unit. And here it is pressed. So you'll make 5 of these 4-patch units per block. And for the wall quilt, you need 5 block A's. So you're going to need 25 of these 4-patch units if you're doing the wall quilt. And if you're doing the lap quilt, you're going to make 13 block A's, which means you're going to need 65 of these 4-patch units. And that's all laid out for you in your PDF of instructions. So here I have cut some of these templates for you. This is the B template, which I've traced onto the back of a light 4.5-inch square, and I've just used a pen to trace it, as you can see here. And then I use a ruler and a rotary cutter to cut it out. I don't want to accidentally cut into my template plastic, so I typically just draw it on there, and I'll often cut a few of them at a time, maybe 4 at a time, whatever you're comfortable with. So I've got those all cut out and ready to go. Now here is the D and C templates, and again I was lazy and only I traced the D and I'm just flipping it over for the C. And I've traced that onto the 5-inch square. It's the medium fabric, and I'm tracing it on the back. I just used an ink pen. You could use your favorite marking tool. So I've traced it to make sure that I have both legs, the mirror image, for each of my flying geese units. And then I'll again use the ruler and cut those out. And then I'll have this extra triangle piece here, which you can use for the challenge project. And here are those 3 units. These are the legs that we'll be using. This is the challenge project triangle, and this is how this is what you'll be using to put together the flying geese unit, which has the star legs. And what we'll do is simply pin one side here, pin it, sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, open it, press it, and then do the same on the opposite side. Pin it, sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance, open it and press it, and you'll have a completed flying geese unit. Now let's take a look again at what that completed block looks like. So here is the completed block A, which is the 5440 or fight block, and this again is the one where I'm using yardage in dark purple, lavender, and a salmon color. And you'll see that I've ensured when I pieced this together, it's basically 3 rows of the 3 units. So I'm piecing 4 patch units on each side of the flying geese unit, ensuring that I am orienting this flying geese unit correctly. And then the second row is 2 flying geese units with a 4 patch unit. And again, I ensure that these flying geese units are oriented properly, as well as the diagonal row here of the 4 patch. And then we have a duplicate of the top row, which is going to be at the bottom, but again, making sure we orient the flying geese unit properly, as well as the dark 2.5 patches. So this is the completed block. Again, when you're sewing it together, make sure that you're allowing yourself the 1/4 inch seam allowances on the outside points so that you don't lose your points. You will square this up to 12.5 inches. And I believe one thing I forgot to mention when I was demonstrating the flying geese units, for the wall quilt, you're going to need 20 of these flying geese star units. And if you're doing the lap quilt, you're going to need 52 of these star flying geese units for that quilt. So those are the quantities that you need. And then square everything up to 12.5 inches. Get those blocks ready, and then next week we'll be on to block B. And I look forward to seeing you then. Have a great week.